Ma'am, I need you to calm down and tell me exactly what happened.
Calm down! You tell me where he is! This is your fault! Please, Big Run! Wanna run! Please! Joe! Please! Run! Everyone!
Get those bulldozers off my land right now. The roar left my throat before I even realized I was shouting. Engines thundered across the pasture, metal teeth biting into the earth like a swarm of locusts. The man in the orange vest didn't stop. He waved his arm, and the machine lurched forward again, chewing through the fence I'd mended last spring. My granddaughter Elise clung to the porch rail, eyes wide with fear. The smell of diesel and crushed grass filled the morning air. I sprinted toward the lead dozer, mud splashing against my boots, waving my arms like a madman. "Turn it off!" I yelled, slapping the side of the steel cabin. The operator hesitated just long enough for a woman's voice to cut through the chaos. "Stand down, Mr. Travis. You're interfering with a lawful construction order." Carla Withers, HOA president. Her white SUV gleamed behind the machines like a snake poised to strike. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, heels sinking into the dirt. "You can't be here," I said, breath heaving. "This is my ranch." Her smile was a blade. Correction. It's community property now. I froze. Community property? The word hit harder than the engine noise. Carla adjusted her sunglasses, tapping a stack of papers against her clipboard as if that alone made her right. Behind her stood two sheriff's deputies, one young, nervous, the other stone-faced. "We're widening the easement for the new water pipeline," she announced. "Approved by the county board, for the good of River Glen." She said it like scripture. I stepped closer, my voice low but shaking with anger. "That line runs through my wife's memorial tree. You didn't ask. You didn't even warn me." Carla didn't flinch. Progress doesn't ask for permission. The younger deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" Carla cut him off. "Carry on, gentlemen." She turned her gaze back to me. "Mr. Travis, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stared past her at the oak tree on the ridge, the one I'd planted for Claire 20 years ago, its roots deep, its branches spread wide like her arms once did when she hugged me after long days. The machine rolled forward again. Something inside me cracked. "Stop!" I lunged toward the operator's ladder, but the older deputy grabbed my arm. "Sir, step back!" I could smell the leather of his gloves, the dust on his uniform. "They're trespassing," I shouted. "You know they're trespassing." He shook his head. "Paperwork says otherwise." Carla folded her arms, satisfied. "You see, even law enforcement agrees." The engine roared. The blade met wood. The sound, God, that sound wasn't just a tree falling. It was every memory collapsing at once. Splinters flew, birds scattered, and when the trunk hit the ground, Elise screamed. I turned to her, helpless. She buried her face in my chest, her tiny shoulders shaking. Carla watched with polite detachment, like a queen inspecting a battlefield she'd already won. That night, silence filled the house heavier than grief itself. The kitchen clock ticked, every second a reminder that I'd done nothing. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cold mug, staring at the empty spot on the ridge visible through the window. Elise slept fitfully upstairs. The world outside was quiet except for frogs by the creek. Somewhere out there, under floodlights, strangers were carving my land open like a patient on a table. I pulled out the deed from my safe faded ink, my name, Claire's signature, proof of ownership, proof of love, proof that this ground meant something. But the paper trembled in my hands. What good was proof against people who rewrote rules whenever they pleased? 3 days later, I heard tires on gravel. I stepped onto the porch before the knock came. Carla, again, same SUV, same arrogance, flanked by the same deputies. "Mr. Travis," she said briskly, "we've begun preliminary trenching. You're advised to stay clear of the site for your own safety." I stared at her. "Safety? You destroyed a memorial tree." She tilted her head, feigning pity. "Collateral inconvenience." My jaw clenched. "You can't just rewrite property lines." "We didn't," she said, handing me a document. The original county survey from 1973 grants a shared easement for public utilities. Our lawyers confirmed it. Perfectly legal. I skimmed the paper-dense paragraphs of legal jargon and signatures from ghosts long dead. It was real, or at least official enough to crush me. "You knew exactly what you were doing," I muttered. She smiled. "Of course. It's my job." After they left, I drove into town, papers trembling in the passenger seat. The law office smelled of old coffee and defeat. The attorney barely looked 30. "They exploited an archaic clause," he explained, flipping through the pages. "Technically, they can claim right-of-way for public infrastructure." He glanced up. "It's unethical, but not illegal. How much to fight it?" he sighed. 5, maybe 10 grand just to start, and even then, odds are slim. Outside, the sunlight felt like mockery. Across the street, a banner fluttered. River Glen Pipeline building a better future. I wanted to tear it down. Instead, I drove home in silence. The hum of the truck filling the void where hope used to live. The bulldozers returned Monday at dawn. The sound woke me before the sun. I stepped outside barefoot, coffee steaming in my hand, and watched them roll across the pasture. The air smelled of diesel again. Elise patted out in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "They're back, Grandpa?" "Yeah, sweetheart," I whispered. "They're back." She slipped her hand into mine. Together we watched the earth buckle. The trench stretched like a scar from one end of the field to the other. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my feet, like the land itself crying out. When the blade reached the creek, it sliced through the reflection of the morning sky. I'd never felt smaller in my own home. By noon, the pasture was unrecognizable. Piles of dirt, shattered roots, torn fences. The men worked in rhythm, machines groaning like beasts of burden. Carla stood at the edge of the chaos, giving orders into her phone. I walked toward her, mud streaking my boots. "You've made your point," I said. "Leave my creek alone." She didn't even look up. "We're almost done here, Mr. Travis. You'll adjust." "Adjust?" The word tasted like rust. "You're bleeding my land dry for your vanity project." She chuckled softly. "For the community. The community doesn't live here." I snapped. "We do." Carla finally met my eyes, her voice dripping condescension. "Then maybe it's time you moved somewhere that fits your lifestyle." Something inside me hardened that instant. I didn't yell again. I didn't threaten. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she wasn't here to compromise. She was here to conquer. That evening, I sat on the porch while Elise drew in her notebook. The smell of turned earth still hung in the air. "Grandpa," she said without looking up, "are they going to take the whole farm?" "No," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "They're not." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not done fighting yet." Her pencil paused. She smiled faintly. "You sound like Grandma." The next morning, I shaved, put on a clean shirt, and drove into River Glen. Their clubhouse was everything I despised about that place. Gleaming floors, fake plants, the faint chemical scent of chlorine. The HOA meeting was already in progress. I signed the guest sheet, ignoring the stares. Carla sat at the head table, flanked by 4 board members in matching polos. She smirked when she saw me. When they called for public comment, I rose. "My name is Jack Travis. I own the ranch bordering your subdivision." Carla leaned back, amused. "Proceed." I laid my deed on the podium. "Your construction crews are trespassing. This land has been privately owned since 1958, clear of HOA jurisdiction. You're violating property rights and destroying protected water access." For 2 minutes, I spoke calm, factual, every word weighed like a nail hammered into a coffin. I talked about the spring, the ecosystem, the heritage of this land. When I finished, the room was quiet. Carla broke the silence with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for your comments, Mr. Travis," she said sweetly. "Unfortunately, your objections are moot." She gestured to the man beside her, who handed me another document. "Cease and desist," she said. "You are hereby ordered to refrain from interfering with authorized work." I stared at the paper. My name typed neatly, my defeat formalized. A ripple of polite applause followed from the board. That was the moment I realized they didn't see me as a neighbor or even a man. I was just another obstacle on a map. Outside, the night smelled of rain and chlorine. I walked across the parking lot, heart pounding. "Hey," a voice called. An older man caught up to me. "Don't let her get to you," he said. "Name's Mike. Been here 20 years. She's run off half the neighborhood with fines and threats." He told me about the others' families crushed under petty rules, liens, and legal traps. And then, quietly, he added, "That pipeline? Her brother's company got the contract. She's making a killing off community funds." The pieces started to fall into place. "Corruption," I muttered. Mike nodded. "Everyone knows. Nobody dares to fight her." I looked back at the clubhouse lights. Maybe it's time someone did. When I got home, the moonlight poured through the window onto the oak's shattered stump. Elise was asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open to a drawing of the tree whole again, branches reaching for the sky. I knelt beside her, brushing her hair back, and whispered, "I'll fix this." Because it wasn't just about land anymore. It was about memory, about Claire, about every person who'd ever been bullied by people like Carla and told to accept it. As I watched the shadow of the broken ridge stretch across the yard, a plan began forming, faint, impossible, but real. They thought they'd buried me under dirt, but they just handed me the shovel. The trench cut deeper every day, a raw wound stretching across my pasture. Each morning I'd hear the same mechanical groan steel on soil, progress on autopilot. They said it was for the community, but all I saw was desecration. The creek that once shimmered with Claire's reflection now looked like a drainage ditch. Every scoop of earth they took felt like another piece of her memory torn away. One evening, while checking the fence line, I noticed something odd. The trench veered sharply to the left, away from the route I'd seen on Carla's map. It didn't make sense. The new direction cut straight across the hardest, rockiest section of the pasture. No engineer would choose that unless they had to hide something. I crouched down, tracing the soil with my fingers. Fresh stakes, each marked with orange tape, led toward the North Ridge, the oldest part of the spring system. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked in the wind, and Elise's breathing from the next room was soft and steady. I sat at the kitchen table, the survey map spread out under the lamplight, red ink marking the path they claimed the pipeline would take. The new trench didn't match it, not even close. My engineer's instincts began to itch. Something was wrong. Either they'd made a monumental mistake or they were lying on purpose. By dawn, I was back outside, boots sinking into the mud. I followed the trench until it vanished behind a patch of cottonwoods. There, beyond the noise of machinery, the air felt different, cooler, untouched. I pushed through the brush until I heard it, a faint, steady gurgle, the sound of living water, and then I saw it, a small, crystal-clear pool bubbling up between stones, the true source. It wasn't part of the main creek at all. This was the original spring, hidden for decades behind wild growth. I knelt down, cupping the water in my hands. It was cold, pure, ancient. And it wasn't on my land. The coordinates clicked in my mind. The spring was a few hundred yards upstream, on a neglected property once owned by an old man named Arthur Miller. He died years ago. The place had gone to ruin, taxes unpaid. The HOA had tapped into a private source, not public utility. Their entire pipeline was built on a lie. I stood there, heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Carla thought she'd stolen my water, but she'd stolen someone else's, and I'd just found the evidence to bury her with. I needed confirmation. I called George Lindell, an old friend from my Army engineering days. We hadn't talked in years, but when he picked up, his voice was still the same, steady, practical, the kind of man who solved problems by dismantling them. I told him what I'd found. He didn't sound surprised. "Send me coordinates," he said simply. "I'll be there in the morning." The next day, we walked the ridge together, flashlights cutting through the fog. George was in his 60s now. but his mind was still a machine. He crouched beside the spring, scooped up a handful of water, studied the angle of the terrain. After a long silence, he said, "You're right. They tapped the feeder spring, the heart of the valley." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "You know what that means, don't you?" I nodded. "They don't own it," he grinned. "And you could." Back at the kitchen table, George spread out a fresh county map and marked the boundaries in pencil. "This entire water system runs from here," he drew a line from the spring, "down through your pasture and into the HOA's intake. You buy this land, Jack, and you own the source. Buy it." The idea was insane. My savings were almost gone after lawyer fees and lost income, but the thought wouldn't leave me. I pulled up the county tax records on my computer. The Miller property, 10 acres including the spring, was listed as foreclosed, heading for online auction in 2 weeks. Starting bid, $11,000. That number burned into my brain. Everything I had left, give or take a few hundred. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen until dawn. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. While the HOA crews worked in daylight, I worked at night. I calculated flow rates, mapped elevations, confirmed what George had said: the spring fed nearly 70% of the HOA's pipeline intake. Without it, their pumps would run dry in less than 12 hours. During one of those nights, Elise wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "You're still up, Grandpa?" she murmured. I smiled weakly. "Just doing a little math." She climbed onto my lap, looking at the maps. "Are you going to fix the water?" "Something like that," I said. She yawned. "Grandma would like that." Then she fell asleep against my shoulder. Her words stayed with me until sunrise. The following week was a blur of sacrifice. I sold my old restored tractor, the one Claire and I rebuilt the year before she passed. I cashed out the savings bonds we'd bought when Elise was born. Each transaction felt like tearing out another root of the life we'd built. But revenge isn't about hate, it's about restoration, and I was going to restore what was ours. George helped me prepare the paperwork. We double-checked the parcel ID, the mineral rights, the water entitlements from 1,957. Everything was intact. "Once you win the auction," he said, "you'll own the pulse of this valley, legally, completely." 2 weeks later, I sat at my kitchen table again, the auction site open, a clock counting down. My palms were slick with sweat. The bid started at $11,000. A few anonymous bidders joined. I waited, heart hammering, until the timer hit 10 seconds. Then I entered my maximum bid, $15,700. Every last dollar I had. When the timer hit 0, the word "sold" flashed on the screen. I didn't cheer. I just sat there, hands trembling. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but for the first time in months, I felt calm. The land was mine. The spring was mine. The power was mine. The next morning, George came over with coffee and 2 shovels. "You ready to turn the tables?" he asked. I nodded. "Let's give the water back to where it belongs." We drove out to the new property. The old Miller house leaned sideways, half swallowed by weeds. The spring was still flowing strong, the HOA's intake pipe running right beneath it like a parasite. We got to work clearing the second channel, the natural runoff that had been clogged by years of neglect. It wasn't sabotage, it was restoration. The job took 2 hours of back-breaking work, digging, stacking rocks, redirecting the flow along the natural swale. Sweat dripped into my eyes, mud caked my hands, but I kept going. When we finished, George stood beside me, grinning. The water, clear as glass, now ran freely away from the HOA's pipeline, winding through the field like it remembered where it belonged. "Hydrology," he said with a chuckle, "isn't about control. It's about respect." We packed up and returned to the ranch. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat on the porch, and waited. It started small, one truck, speeding down the road toward the HOA's clubhouse. Then another. Within hours, the neighborhood was in chaos. Lawns turned brown mid-sprinkle. Sprinkler heads coughed air. Toilets refused to flush. The Great River Glen water project had gone dry. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunset. Elise came outside, holding her sketchbook. "Why are they all so mad, Grandpa?" "Because," I said softly, "they built their whole world on someone else's land." "Like bullies at school?" she asked. "Exactly like that." She nodded solemnly, then looked out at the horizon. "Do you think they'll say sorry?" I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. People like Carla don't apologize. They just panic." And panic she did. By afternoon, her pristine SUV came barreling down the road, tires spitting gravel. She didn't even knock, just stormed out, red-faced, shouting before she'd reached the porch. "What did you do, Travis?" she screamed. "You've cut off a public utility. That's a federal offense." "I didn't move. I haven't touched your pipeline. Don't lie to me," she snapped, waving her clipboard like a sword. "Our water disappeared overnight." "Maybe," I said, handing her an envelope. "You're just looking in the wrong place." Inside were copies of the property deed and the 1,957 water rights. Her expression drained from rage to disbelief as she read. This can't be real," she stammered. "It's as real as your bulldozers," I said. "You built your empire on my spring. You've been stealing my water since the day you broke ground." For once, Carla was speechless. Her voice faltered. Her mask cracked. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. She turned on her heel, muttering into her phone as she stormed off. The sound of her car fading down the road was the sweetest music I'd heard in years. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching fireflies dance over the pasture. George joined me, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "She'll come back," he said. "People like her always do." I nodded. "Good. I'll be waiting, because this wasn't over." Not by a long shot. I'd won the first battle, but the war for this land, the one Claire and I built our lives on, was just beginning. The next day felt like calm before a storm, but I knew better. Carla Withers wasn't the type to crawl away and lick her wounds. She'd come back, loud and furious, dragging the law behind her if she had to. I spent the morning walking the ridge, tracing the flow of the new channel with George's map in hand. The spring ran clear and cold, singing its quiet song of victory. Yet, underneath that peace, I felt the tension of something inevitable building. By noon, the valley echoed with the distant rumble of engines. The HOA's trucks arrived in a convoy, dust spiraling into the sky. They stopped at the far end of my pasture. Engineers, board members, Carla's brother's crew, all of them stomping around, confused, arguing in circles. Their brand new pipeline had gone bone dry overnight. I could hear the shouting even from my porch. Then I saw her. Carla's white SUV kicked up a cloud of dust as it tore up my driveway. She didn't even park straight, just slammed the door and came marching toward me, face red, jaw tight, papers clutched in her hand like a weapon. Elise, who'd been sketching nearby, froze. I told her, "Go inside, sweetheart." "What did you do?" Carla screamed, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You sabotaged public utilities. You senile old man. Do you have any idea how illegal that is?" I didn't flinch. I just took a slow sip of coffee. "Careful, Carla. That's a lot of accusations for someone who doesn't even own the water she's crying over." Her face twisted. "You're bluffing." I reached for the manila envelope on the porch table and handed it to her. "Read it." She snatched the papers from my hand and scanned them. The color drained from her face as the truth hit. "Deed. Parcel 17 B. Arthur Miller Estate transferred to." Her voice faltered. "You?" I smiled thinly. "That's right. And those," I said, handing her another page, "are the 1,957 water rights tied to that land. So unless you've got a time machine and can buy it before me, I'd say you're trespassing again." For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked small. The power in her voice evaporated, replaced by stunned silence. The clipboard dropped to her side. She muttered something I couldn't make out, then turned and stormed back to her car. The sound of gravel crunching under her tires was the sweetest sound I'd heard in weeks. But George was right. People like Carla don't surrender, they regroup. That evening, Mike called. "She's losing it," he said. "The HOA's in chaos." Her brothers pulled his equipment out, claiming geological failure. "Half the board wants her gone, but she's blaming you for everything." "Let her," I said. "The truth will show itself." And then it came, an official letter in a crisp white envelope. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting. My attendance was strongly recommended. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. I stared at the letter for a long while. This was it, the reckoning. The moment to end it all, not with rage, but with truth. The clubhouse was packed that night. Every seat taken, people standing shoulder to shoulder, faces tense. These weren't Carla's loyal subjects anymore. They were angry, tired neighbors who hadn't had running water in 3 days. At the front table sat Carla, flanked by the remaining board members, her confidence visibly cracking. Her brother was gone, replaced by a man in a cheap suit who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. When I walked in, the room fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Dozens of eyes followed me as I made my way to the back, where George waited with a folder of documents. "You sure about this?" he whispered. "Dead sure," I said. "They wanted me here. I'll give them a show." The meeting opened with Henderson, the HOA president, banging his gavel nervously. "Order, please. We're here to discuss the recent disruption to the community water system. Mrs. Withers, would you begin?" Carla stood, her voice trembling but determined. "As we've stated, there's been a geological shift affecting our water supply. We're taking every measure to..." A man in the front row jumped up. "A geological shift? My brother's a geologist, and he says, you're full of it." The room erupted, shouting, accusations, chaos. Henderson banged the gavel again, but nobody cared. Carla raised her voice, trying to regain control. "Please, everyone." That was my cue. I walked straight down the center aisle. The crowd parted like a tide. When I reached the front, I set my folder on the table. Carla's voice died mid-word. Without saying a thing, I opened the folder and began laying out papers one by one across the board's table. A deed, a certified water rights document, a county map, an auction certificate stamped with my name. Then, slowly, I looked up. "My name is Jack Travis," I said into the microphone. "And there's been no geological shift, there's just been theft." You could hear the silence fall like a curtain. I gestured toward the documents. "Here's the truth. The HOA's pipeline was built illegally on land that wasn't yours to use. You've been siphoning water from the Miller property, which I now own legally, by public auction. The water you claim as community property? It's mine. You've been stealing it." Gasps spread through the crowd. Carla's eyes darted wildly, searching for a lifeline. I wasn't done. And if you're wondering why she fought so hard to push this pipeline through, maybe these will explain. From my briefcase, I pulled out another set of papers, copies of the HOA's construction contracts. Mike had helped me file a public records request, and what we found was gold. "These contracts," I said, sliding them across the table, "show that the project was awarded to Withers Construction, a company owned by Carla's brother, without any open bidding process. The budget was inflated by nearly 40%, padded with fake shell company bids." The crowd began to murmur again, louder this time, angrier. Henderson's face turned pale. Carla shook her head frantically. "That's a lie!" George stepped forward with a large poster map, slapping it onto an easel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his calm voice cutting through the noise, "I've been a hydrologist for 30 years. Here's what really happened." He pointed to the map. "The HOA pipeline runs here." His finger traced the red line. "But the spring it taps is here, outside the easement, on private land now owned by Mr. Travis. You can verify all of this in county records. They built their system on stolen water." The room exploded. Dozens of homeowners stood up, shouting. Some demanded Carla's resignation, others demanded refunds. Henderson banged the gavel so hard it nearly broke. Carla's face had gone ghost white, but the rage still flickered in her eyes. "This is sabotage!" she screamed, voice cracking. "He's blackmailing this community!" I stepped closer to the mic. "No, Carla. This is consequence. You destroyed my land, stole my water, and lied to every single person in this room. You don't get to play victim now." A woman in the second row, the same teacher who'd called for my removal weeks ago, stood and raised her hand. I move for a vote of no confidence in Carla Withers and her immediate removal from this board. Henderson looked around. A dozen voices echoed, seconded. The gavel came down one last time. All in favor? Hands shot up across the room. Dozens. Almost unanimous. "The motion passes," Henderson said, his voice trembling. "Effective immediately. Carla Withers is removed from the HOA board." For a moment, there was total silence, the kind that follows a storm when you realize it's truly over. Carla looked around the room, disbelief written all over her face. Then, without a word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. When the sound faded, Henderson turned to me. "Mr. Travis," he said, "on behalf of the board, would you consider taking her seat?" I didn't answer. I just gathered my papers and walked out into the cool night air. Some wars don't end with victory. They end with exhaustion. Outside, George caught up to me. "You handled that like a general," he said with a grin. "More like a survivor," I replied. We stood under the porch light, watching the crowd disperse. People were shaking my hand, patting my shoulder, thanking me. It felt strange. I hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted peace. But peace is never free. It has to be built, brick by brick, after the fire dies. 2 nights later, I learned that Carla had one last move left in her. I was asleep when a grinding noise jolted me awake heavy machinery, somewhere near the ridge. The clock read 2:14 a.m. I slipped on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped into the night. The sound grew louder as I neared the Miller property the spring. My gut tightened. I saw the glow of headlights through the trees, jerking back and forth like a wounded animal. And then, there she was, Carla, covered in mud, sitting in the cab of a backhoe, tearing into the earth like a madwoman. She was trying to build a crude dam to redirect the water, her last desperate attempt to reclaim control. "Unbelievable," I whispered, pulling out my phone. I'd installed a trail cam on that access road weeks ago, just in case. Its little red light blinked steadily, capturing every second of her insanity. I called the sheriff's department, kept my voice calm. "You're going to want to send a unit to Miller Road," I said. "There's someone trespassing on my property with heavy machinery." By the time the deputy arrived, Carla had made a full disaster of the place. The backhoe was half stuck in the mud, the spring a churned mess of water and clay. She stumbled out of the cab, screaming, "He provoked me! He ruined everything!" The deputy's flashlight cut through the chaos. It was the same young officer from the first day. He just looked tired now. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "step away from the equipment." Carla spun toward him. "You don't understand! He stole my water!" I stepped out from the shadows. "No, Carla," I said quietly. "I reclaimed it." I handed the deputy my phone. The video from the trail cam showed everything. Her cutting the lock, driving the backhoe, destroying the channel. Time-stamped. Undeniable. When the deputy finished watching, he sighed. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back." Carla froze. "You can't be serious." "I'm afraid I am," he said. "You're under arrest for trespassing, destruction of property, and tampering with a waterway." The click of handcuffs echoed through the night like punctuation on a chapter long overdue. A news van arrived minutes later, camera lights flooding the scene. Carla turned toward them, her face contorted in rage. "He's ruining everything!" she screamed. I stepped into the light, my voice steady. "Not everything, just the part you never earned." The reporter's microphone trembled slightly. Even he could feel it, the weight of justice finally balancing the scales. I watched as they led her away, her pristine white SUV now just another vehicle swallowed by flashing red and blue lights. The same lights she once hid behind to threaten me. The spring gurgled softly behind us, washing the mud clean. It sounded almost like laughter. 6 months have passed since the night the valley woke to flashing lights and the sound of Carla Withers screaming into the dark. Some nights, when the wind drifts down from the ridge, I swear I can still hear the faint echo of that backhoe grinding itself into the mud, her last desperate attempt to hold onto power that was never really hers. The scars she left behind have faded now, mostly. The trench that once split my pasture like a wound is filled in, grass growing thick and green over it, the earth healing in quiet defiance. Each morning, when I walk the fence line, the world feels new. The sun cuts across the fields, golden light sliding over dew-covered blades, and for a moment I forget there was ever a war here. The air smells like rain and hay instead of diesel and fear. Elise runs ahead of me, chasing dragonflies with her sketchbook tucked under one arm, laughing in a way she hasn't in years. That laugh is worth more than any victory, any court ruling, any property deed. After Carla's arrest, everything unraveled fast. The news footage spread like wildfire. HOA president arrested for sabotaging pipeline, running on every local channel for days. People who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped to shake my hand. The same deputies who had stood behind her SUV on that first day came by later to apologize. Funny thing about power, when the fear that holds it together disappears, it collapses faster than a sandcastle in the tide. Carla faced 4 criminal charges: trespassing, destruction of property, tampering with a waterway, and fraud under investigation. Her brother declared bankruptcy within a month. The company that once bullied farmers with cease and desist letters became a cautionary tale in the county courthouse. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just erodes what's rotten until there's nothing left but silence. The HOA didn't know what to do with itself after she was gone. Half the board resigned. The rest sat blinking like deer in headlights. That's when Henderson came to me again. He stood on my porch, hat in hand, and said, "Mr. Travis, we need help fixing this mess. You don't have to trust us. Just help us set things right." I looked out over the pasture where the new oak sapling stood on the ridge, a promise in green. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of that boardroom. Just weariness and a strange sense of responsibility. "All right," I said, "but we do it my way," and they agreed. Our first act was to dissolve the old board entirely. Every seat was reopened to public vote, every decision made transparent. George was appointed technical advisor, Mike was elected as community liaison. The very people Carla had silenced were now the ones writing the rules. We rewrote the charter line by line, cutting out the language she'd used to weaponize authority. From now on, any major infrastructure project would require a 2/3 vote from all homeowners, not just a handful of self-appointed bureaucrats. Every expense, every contractor, every contract would be public record. The days of hidden clauses and quiet threats were over. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like repair. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was rebuilding trust. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started showing up at one another's doors again. Mike and I spent weekends fixing old fences, not because they were broken, but because people finally wanted to share the work. A retired teacher brought over a pie one afternoon and said, "It finally feels like home again." That's what victory looks like in real life. Not fireworks, not parades, just people smiling without fear. When the new bylaws were signed, we held a small gathering by the creek. No speeches, no cameras, just a table, some lemonade, and the quiet murmur of water flowing where it was always meant to flow. George raised his glass and said, "To Claire's well." Everyone repeated it softly, like a benediction. That name stuck, Claire's well. We built a small wooden sign at the spring, hand-carved by Elise herself. It reads, "To remember where truth begins." The spring is now part of a protected reserve, a decision passed unanimously. No pipes, no pumps, no contracts, just water, doing what water does best, moving forward. I replaced the old chain link gate with a heavy oak one, carved with the initials C.T. Claire Travis. Elise painted wildflowers around it. Every time I see her tiny handprints in the paint, I remember why I fought. Because this was never just about property lines. It was about teaching her that peace, like land, must be defended not with anger, but with endurance. One evening, George stopped by with 2 mugs of coffee and that mischievous smile of his. "You know," he said, sitting on the porch rail, "they're calling you the Waterman now." I laughed. "I'd rather just be the man who finally got his quiet back." He sipped his coffee. "Quiet's earned. You bled for it." We sat in silence a while, listening to the cicadas. He looked toward the ridge. "That tree's taken root fast." "Claire always did have a stubborn streak," I said. He chuckled. "Guess it runs in the family." We didn't need to say anything more. Some friendships are like rivers, deep, wordless, constant. As for Carla, her story faded as fast as her influence. Her trial came and went with little fanfare. She pled guilty to 2 charges to avoid jail time. The court ordered restitution, but she'll never repay what she truly took from this valley: time, trust, and peace. Her mansion sits empty now, blinds drawn, for sale sign leaning crooked in the yard. People say she moved to Arizona. Others say she still drives by the old clubhouse at night, watching from the shadows. Maybe she's haunted by what she lost. Or maybe she's haunted by what she never really had control. The community she once ruled by fear has learned to laugh again. Children play in yards without parents glancing nervously toward the HOA patrol cars. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now share cookouts and stories. There's talk of turning the old clubhouse into a community library. Funny how quickly people rediscover humanity when the paperwork bullies are gone. Mike's son joined me last week to mend the north fence. He's 16, restless, full of questions. When we finished, he asked, "Mr. Travis, why didn't you just move away instead of fighting?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "Because, kid, when someone tries to take what's sacred, the land, the water, your peace, and you walk away, you don't just lose a place, you lose a part of yourself." He nodded slowly. I think he understood. That night, Elise and I sat by the creek as the fireflies came out. She was drawing the new oak tree again, the one that replaced the one Carla's bulldozers crushed. Her lines were surer now, confident. "Grandpa," she said, "do you think Grandma can see it?" I looked up at the stars reflected in the water. "I think she never left," I said. The wind stirred the grass, gentle and cool. For the first time, the land didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt alive, like it was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Elise closed her notebook and leaned her head on my shoulder. "Feels like home again," she whispered. "Sometimes I still dream of that first day. The roar of engines, the flash of orange vests, the oak tree falling. But when I wake, the sound that replaces it is the rustle of leaves from its successor, strong and green and stubborn against the sky. That's how you heal land and hearts. Not by erasing what happened, but by growing something stronger where it fell. I walk up to the ridge most evenings just to sit beside the sapling and listen to the creek. The horizon glows with that same amber light Claire loved so much. The sign below reads, "Claire's Well." The letters are already weathered, but I like it that way. Nothing worth keeping should ever look too new. Sometimes, newcomers ask about the story. They'll stand by the gate, look at the creek, and say, "So you're the guy who beat the HOA?" I always smile and shake my head. "No," I tell them. I'm the guy who reminded them where the water really comes from, because the truth, like water, always finds its way back. You can dam it, twist it, bury it under paperwork and greed, but it will rise again. It always does. Late one evening, as the sun bled out behind the hills, I set a lantern beside the new oak and whispered, "Claire, we did it." The light flickered, caught by the wind, dancing across the creek like a heartbeat. I sat there until the stars came out, the air cool, the world at peace. Some battles are fought with guns or money. Mine was fought with patience, maps, and a stubborn old man's love. And in the end, that was enough.